All right, hey, just answering the question here, a few questions. Does the Christian God exist? I'm going to try to do this in 10 minutes. I talk a lot, so probably won't happen, but I'll do my best. Well, number one, I would say the universe exists, right? We look at the universe, it exists. It came into existence. People believe in the Big Bang. That tells me that people believe the universe had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, then it had to have a cause. So if something begins, it has to have something that is causing it, right? If it's a domino, boom, hits the next one, it falls over. So what was the cause of that first domino coming? It had a beginning. That first, someone hit the first one, someone set them up, right? If it had a cause, what was it? Was it aliens, as some people might say? It wrote on the back of this crystal, and this protein molecule turned into this. Well, okay, well, where did all that come from? Okay, where did those things come from? Something had to start it. And now that we know we believe that it would have a beginning, and we know that all beginnings have to have a cause, then we ask ourselves, well, what causes? Was it a personal interaction or impersonal? So again, was it just another domino hitting something, or was it personal? Well, we know a domino can't make a choice to fall over and hit the next one. Something had to cause to hit it. It could have been a wind, it could have been a cat, any of those things. But then you have to ask where that object came from. Where did the wind come from? Where did the cat come from? And so at some point, that cause, we look and we see it had a design. Someone set up those dominoes. Someone made that cat. Someone made the wind or caused the wind. And we see that it's very personal, this cause. It doesn't seem to be impersonal because matter, right, doesn't have free will. Matter can't decide what it wants to do. There's a boat sitting out here on the dock as I'm looking at the Caribbean Sea here, and it has to have a captain drive it, right? It has to have someone take it around. It can't just decide to do things on its own and have a free will. But it would seem the world around us and the universe around us is very personal. It's intricate. It works together, right? And so I would say that this cause was personal. Matter is limited in its ability. It can only do what it's inside of it. And what I would argue it's designed to do. Not that mutations and things can't happen on a small scale, but it's generally designed to do what it's called to do. Just like if I design an engine, it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do, but things could go wrong and happen, and it could blow up, or all these different things, right? It could work how it's supposed to or not. But nonetheless, it seems to be a design inside matter, right, to do what it's supposed to do. Oxygen does what it does. Hydrogen, forms water over here. The salt in the ocean and how it cleans itself. I mean, the list could go on and on of how this is a beautiful, beautiful picture of design, which would be my next argument, would be that if the universe now exists and we've established it had a beginning, had a cause, and that cause was personal, then I would look and say, look at the universe, it's in just the right place. It seems to be designed. Our position to the sun, the size of the earth, the size of the sun, the star that we're orbiting around. The tilt of the earth, the magnetic field, the atmosphere, the water versus land ratio on the earth. We'd have to look, and even I think everyone would have to say, out of all the billions of stars that we can see and that we've mapped and planets we've seen, that we're in a very rare place, and a very improbable place, I would say. And so to look apart and say that this all just happened, where does the evidence lead to? More of a personal design, or just a randomness of natural selection and Darwinism of now we've grown to this place? Which one would it be? Even if that was the case, it's still personal. If something had to cause that, even if all of Darwinism is true in the sense of the evolution, the macroevolution, something caused that, something had to initially put that design in it for us to even be here, something personal, right? So natural selection of Darwinism may tell you the how, right? It may, but it can't tell you the why. Only a designer can tell us why. Just like if I was to put this watch in a box, take it all apart, shake it up for 1,000 years, is it going to turn into a watch again? No. A million years? No. It needs a designer. That's even starting with the right parts. And so how much more complex is this universe to say that it's just kind of came into being with an impersonal cause and This doesn't make sense to me. The next one would be good and evil exist, and I believe they exist in an absolute form. Where does an absolute good and evil come from? Do we think there's value in life? Is there such thing as human rights? If you say yes to these things, then where does that come from? If there's value in human life, then who's to say that what Hitler did or was trying to do wasn't good or bad, right? So if you say there is human life value, then what Hitler was doing was absolutely wrong, and the allies that formed against him were right, and the Axis were wrong, and we're glad that they got defeated. But if you don't believe in an absolute truth, an objective truth, where it's found in the object, in this case God, not subjective, is found in us as an individual, whatever you believe is true, do it. Well, hey, I don't believe this gun has a bullet in it. Okay, well, I'm dead. It doesn't make sense of the reality around me. I can't just say, well, just because I believe something makes it true. We need some evidence to that. And it would seem that we agree that what Hitler did was wrong. And so if there are human rights exist, what gives you the right to judge, or don't exist, excuse me, what gives you the right to judge Hitler? What gives him the right to judge us, right? Then you have to say, well, morality is about power, right? Morality is about whoever has the most votes, and whoever controls the power and the votes of the people gets to decide what's morally right and morally wrong. But yet, to you, it'd probably be always wrong to take your child. It'd be always wrong for me to take your child and drown it in the sea out here. It'd be always wrong for me to come and take your money that you've worked hard for. You say, I will never allow that. And most humans would say that. Well, where does that come from? Because there is an absolute sense of good and evil. And so God is that standard of good, and he is the source of good. And that is the only way that we can have an absolute truth, and it makes sense of the world around us. The idea of truth being relative or morals being relative to the individual, subjective, is not actually how people live. Maybe they want to live that in certain political ways or certain standards. But when you start getting down to the nitty gritty, there will be things that people will always say that they are wrong and that I'm not going to allow you to do this. And I would say if they don't, then they're probably lying. Now, again, with the gun analogy, well, hey, I don't believe this gun is going to kill you. And they say, well, fine, then pull the trigger. I don't think they really actually believe that. They just don't want to admit the fact that there has to be a moral absolute. And if there is a moral lawgiver, if there is a moral law that's in us, then there has to be a moral law giver. And I argue that is the Christian God. And the second question, 7 minutes already here, is the New Testament accounts for Jesus, are they reliable? I say absolutely yes, they are. Can I trust the Bible? Well, the Bible was written over 1,500 years on 3 different continents by 40 different people. Okay, unlike the Mormon Bible, written in one place by one guy, and that we're supposed to believe it's all true, right? So 1,500 years, 40 different authors, all writing in unison, declaring same things and all the prophecies, right? We have over 5,000 Greek manuscripts for the New Testament alone, which is what the New Testament was written in. We have another 15,000 in other languages that we can go and compare, and we can look and we can see the age of these things. Some of them dating, not very many of them, and fragments of them dating as close to possibly 25 to 50 years, right, after they were written, after the originals. And so we have a lot. No other written piece of antiquity has that. Homer's Iliad has anywhere from 800 to 1700, depending on what you're reading. Caesar's Gallic Wars has less than that. We can go on and on, but yet we want to teach those things as history, but not the Bible. Well, you may say, well, it has over 400,000 variants in all these manuscripts. That may be true, but all of those can be answered, and most of them are just grammar or spelling or sentence structure versus the only 1% to 2% you might argue that, let's just give and say they are, falsely in there or are totally distorted. They don't change anything of the Christian doctrine and what the Bible is teaching. So there's 400,000 variants, actually don't seem to be that big of a deal. Also in the Bible, we have external sources. So the Bible in itself has internal sources that proves that it's scripture. Peter calls Paul's writing scriptures. But if you don't believe in the Bible, then that might not mean much to you. But we also have archaeology that backs up the Bible. For example, there's real places, real names. Unlike the Mormon Bible that I mentioned, out of the 31 cities I think that are mentioned in the Mormon Bible, not a single one has ever been found or exists today. We have tens, 50s, hundreds of Bible cities that are mentioned and still exist today, or we have found them. A prime example of this is the Pool of Bethesda in 1888. People's like, oh, it doesn't exist, and then all of a sudden they find it, all these 5 porches, just like it's described, these 5 different pools. Pilate, oh, he doesn't exist. 1961, what did they find? The Pilate stone. Oh, and all this history about Pilate. There he is. So we also have non-believer historians. Josephus, Agapius, who was an Arabic, I believe, historian. And they all say that Jesus was a wise teacher. He did wondrous works. He was crucified by Pilate. And his followers believed that Jesus appeared to them and that they were the Messiah. So it doesn't necessarily make it true, but I'm just saying these are people who would not be biased to history and saying this was what was actually being said. Yeah, it's right. This is what being said. I would think that if they read the Gospels, they would see like, hey, oh, all these Gospels, all these guys, this is not true. This guy Jesus didn't exist. He never rose from the dead. They're recording the history as they saw it, and we're not coming against it in a way to say this was absolutely made up. That Jesus was a wise teacher. He did do wonderful works, and he was crucified by Pilate, verified. Now, the followers believed he appeared and was their Messiah. You could argue maybe not verified by these guys, but definitely by the disciples. Tacitus from Roman historian says very similar things. So if the Gospels, again, were made up, these historians would be able to argue against it. Other people living in the time would be able to argue against it. But we don't see that. And the Gospels are consistent with eyewitness testimonies. And so the New Testament is very, very reliable compared to with what we have in other written pieces of antiquity. The biggest problem is if we believe what's inside of it, then now we have to believe in God. Now we have to believe in the supernatural. And a lot of times that hinders people and may hinder you from even believing. And the last thing I would say was, did Jesus rise from the dead? So, okay, you made a good point for God exists. You made a good point that we could believe in the Bible and that it is reliable and that we have exactly what God wants us to have and that it's not necessarily maybe inerrant in what we have now, but in the originals. And we can compare all these manuscripts. We can see all of that. Okay. Now, can I believe what it says inside of it is true? Did Jesus, in particular, rise from the dead? Well, a few quick things on this. We have Josephus and other historians saying Jesus lived and was crucified, and they were not a fan of the Christians. And so you have outside sources saying that he at least lived and he died exactly how the Gospels say. So now was he risen? Well, they're not saying that the body wasn't even missing. They're verifying that as well because the disciples said, hey, they appeared to him and that they were his Messiah. They're not arguing, hey, we found the body. I drew a sketch of him right here. Good old Joe Johnson, saw the body and buried him or whatever. They're not arguing the point. The body was gone. The Romans didn't argue that point. The body was gone. And so since we've established that, we have to ask ourselves, do the disciples have an ulterior motive to lie about Jesus rising from the dead? Why would they lie? And I would say it'd actually be the opposite. They would have more of an ulterior motive to if it did happen than to lie about it because they were being persecuted in the years in particular to come by the Romans. And so, but they continue to stand firm and they continue to die for their faith. They can sincerely be wrong and someone could sincerely die for something that's not right or not true. But we see their resolve, all of them, just continuing, and all the followers after that. We see that Jesus appeared to over 500 people at once. So again, these things could have been corroborated. They could have been talked about, collaborated of like, did this really happen? Yeah, I saw. Yeah, this. They could talk to these people when those first manuscripts were written. They could actually verify, hey, even next generation, your grandpa said that he saw Jesus. 100 years ago. Yeah, I remember hearing the stories. That's what he said. And you could go and talk to all of these people. They are still there. Just as if I were to tell you my experience and my testimony, then you may be like, well, that's subjective. Well, maybe parts of it are of what happened on the inside, but you could still go talk to my parents. You could talk to people in high school. All these other people still exist. Did this really happen? Did Brandon did this? Was he able? Okay, well, all this other stuff is true. Now I need to believe if anything else is true. So we have good evidence for all of this. It could be verified. And if you don't believe in the resurrection, you have to explain the empty tomb because that's been verified. You have to explain the appearance of Jesus to others. That's been verified. The changes in the disciples after, Obviously, they were willing to die. That's verified. The change in the world through Christianity, and it takes faith, right? But I'm telling you right now, it's not a blind faith. There's a big difference. It's not a blind faith. Um, we don't need to prove necessarily the resurrection. We just need to prove that it is reasonable and maybe the most reasonable of all the explanations, whether the disciples stole the body or the swoon theory that Jesus passed out on the cross, and there's 4 or 5 others. What's the most reasonable explanation out of everything that we could talk about and everything that we could see? Well, is it the supernatural? Is it that Jesus was who he said he was, who the Gospels record him to be, and even historians saying they did wonderful works and was a teacher? Is that more reasonable, right? Does the pieces of the puzzle fit, right? And how many pieces of a puzzle do you need to see the picture, right? You put out the border, and it's a 100-piece puzzle, right? How many pieces of that do you need to then see to then look from the edge? Hey, this is a cat picture. Even though I'm missing 50% of the pieces, I can clearly tell there's the paw, there's an eye, there's these flowers in the background, there's the ear. This is a cat picture. How much do we need? See, there's incredible evidence, and yes, it takes faith, but it's not a blind faith, right? It's not a blind faith. Faith is acting according to what you have good reason to believe is true, not sitting on your bum and having no evidence for it. So again, how many of these puzzle pieces do you need? It's not a blind faith. We have evidence. You have to search. You have to look in these things yourself. And as you seek God, I believe that you will find him. And I will lastly say this: the resurrection makes sense. It makes sense. With it, you see the answering to suffering and our sin and death. Every culture, everybody, atheist, everyone has to deal with sin and death. With this, it makes sense. You see the hope that we have from being rescued from the evil, right, that's in this world that we would all agree is there, and death again. Why? Because he lived a perfect life for you and for I, and he gives us his righteousness. So you see the heart of a loving God who desires to save their people from their sins in the midst of the resurrection. So I encourage you, search it out. Look at these evidences, and we could always talk again.